My name is Peggy Lopez, and I'm 22 years old. I've learned that some wounds don't bleed. They just follow you quietly through every room you ever walk into, reminding you who was protected and who was expendable. For me, that lesson began in high school when my older brother decided that his pride mattered more than my entire existence. He was 4 years older than me, already. Tall, already popular, already crowned as one of those boys teachers excused and classmates admired without question. I was 14, awkward braces cutting into my gums, shoulders always hunched, like I could fold myself small enough to disappear. We hadn't always been enemies. When we were younger, he used to let me trail behind him, used to defend me when neighborhood kids got mean. But something changed the moment he stepped into high school and realized being cool meant pretending I didn't exist unless I embarrassed him. The rumor started because I told the truth. That's the part no one ever seems to care about. His girlfriend at the time cornered me after school, blocking my path near the bike racks, demanding to know whether the girl from his biology class meant anything to him. She was bigger than me, louder than me, and already a senior who knew how to make people afraid just by standing too close. I didn't volunteer anything. I didn't scheme. I didn't whisper behind anyone's back. I panicked. And when she demanded an answer, I gave her one because I didn't want to lie, and because somewhere deep down I believed honesty still mattered. The confrontation that followed was explosive. She humiliated him in front of his friends in the cafeteria, voices raised, faces turning laughter, erupting like a public execution. He never forgot it. He never forgave it. Instead, he punished me. Within weeks, people started looking at me differently. Whispers followed me down hallways. Lockers slammed shut when I passed. Someone scratched thief into my desk with a compass blade. He told people I was a kleptomaniac, that they needed to watch their wallets around me. And because he was 18, a varsity football player, a senior, with a grin, adults trusted, everyone believed him. Teachers watched me more closely. Friends stopped inviting me over. Girls clutched their bags tighter when I sat nearby. Boys laughed, just loud enough for me to hear. I spent 4 years drowning in a reputation I never earned, punished for a crime I never committed, and no one ever thought to ask me if it was true. My parents noticed the change, of course. They saw me stop asking to go to dances, stop bringing friends home, stop smiling in photos. But they never confronted him. They called it sibling rivalry, told me not to be so sensitive, reminded me that high school didn't last forever. What they really meant was that they didn't want to rock the boat. My brother was their pride, their easy child, the one who made them look good. I was inconvenient, emotional, too much work, so they let me endure it. Prom came and went without an invitation. Homecoming passed like a rumor I wasn't allowed to touch. I learned how to eat lunch in bathroom stalls, and how to pretend I didn't care when people laughed behind their hands. By the time he left for college, the damage was done. I avoided him whenever he came home, treating him like a ghost I didn't want to acknowledge. We existed in the same space during holidays, polite and cold, our parents hovering nearby, like referees, making sure nothing ugly happened in front of relatives. I never planned to attend his wedding. I didn't want to sit in a room celebrating a man who had ruined 4 years of my life without consequence. But my mother insisted. She said it would look strange if I didn't come. She said people would ask questions. And as always, appearances won. So I went. The wedding was expensive in that sterile, carefully curated way, meant to impress. White flowers everywhere, polished wood floors, laughter that sounded rehearsed. His bride Chloe was beautiful in a way that felt distant, sharp, like glass you admired without wanting to touch. She had never been kind to me, not in the 2 years she'd been with my brother before the wedding. Every interaction carried a subtle edge, a reminder that I was tolerated, not welcomed. I didn't expect anything different that day. I ate, I smiled when spoken to, I counted minutes until it was socially acceptable to leave. Half an hour after the ceremony, after lunch had been served and conversations dulled into background noise, I decided I'd stayed long enough. Chloe told everyone she was going back to the hotel to change into something more comfortable. No one questioned it. Brides are allowed to disappear. I slipped out quietly, relieved by the cool air, as I headed toward the parking lot, already rehearsing the excuse I'd give if anyone asked where I'd gone. That was when I saw her. She was pressed against my brother's friend Marcus, tucked into a shadowed corner where the building blocked the light. His hands were familiar on her waist. Her mouth was on his like it belonged there. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that my brain was filling in a cruel joke because cruelty was all I'd ever been given by my family. Then she pulled back laughing softly, and I knew it was real. She saw me at the same time I realized my car was parked just a few spaces away. The world went silent. Chloe shoved Marcus away, her expression shifting from desire to panic in a heartbeat, and hissed something at him I couldn't hear. He bolted. She walked toward me like nothing had happened, smoothing her hair, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stood there frozen, watching her explain herself with the ease of someone who had rehearsed excuses long before she ever needed them. She told me my brother was a good provider. She told me she loved him in a practical way. She told me her heart wanted something else. And then she asked me to keep it quiet. She said she'd give me whatever I wanted. Something shifted inside me. Then something cold and deliberate. I thought of locker doors slamming, of dances I never attended, of parents who told me to be quiet so things would look nice. I thought of how my brother once told me that just because you know something doesn't mean you have to say it. And for the first time, I understood exactly how silence could be used like a weapon. I looked at Chloe and realized she was terrified, and I decided I would let her be. I didn't answer Chloe right away. I remember the way the silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable like humidity before a storm. She kept glancing over her shoulder, scanning the parking lot as if Marcus might reappear or someone else might wander too close. Her hands trembled when she clasped them together, knuckles whitening as she waited for me to say something, anything that would tell her how much damage she was about to take. She started talking again when I didn't respond, her voice lowering, smoothing itself into something almost tender. She told me she hadn't planned for it to happen like this, that she'd been confused for a long time, that marriage didn't mean what people thought it meant once you were actually inside it. She said my brother would be fine, that he was strong, that he had money and stability and a future no matter what. She said Marcus made her feel alive. I listened without interrupting, noticing how easily she categorized love and security as separate transactions, how calmly she reduced my brother to a paycheck while insisting she wasn't a bad person. When she finally stopped, she looked at me expectantly, like I owed her reassurance. I can give you whatever you want, she said again, more urgently this time. Just don't say anything, please. The words echoed in my head, colliding with memories I'd spent years trying to bury. I saw myself at 14, standing in a hallway while classmates whispered and laughed. I saw my parents' faces when I tried to explain, the way their eyes slid away from mine as if discomfort absolved them of responsibility. I felt that old familiar tightness in my chest, the knowledge that telling the truth had never protected me before. Silence had never saved me either, but at least silence could be chosen. I surprised myself by asking her how long it had been going on. Chloe hesitated, then admitted it wasn't new. Weeks, maybe months. Long enough that it wasn't a mistake anymore, but a pattern. Long enough that she'd made peace with it. I nodded slowly, absorbing that detail, letting it settle into place alongside everything else I knew about my family's capacity for betrayal. I told her I would keep quiet, and the relief that flooded her face was immediate and overwhelming. She reached for my hands, gratitude spilling out in rushed apologies and promises. I stopped her. If I do this, I said, my voice steady, despite the noise inside my head, it won't be for free. She stiffened, the relief evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. I watched suspicion creep into her eyes, followed by calculation. I told her my terms plainly, $1,000 every month. No excuses, no delays. As long as she paid, her secret stayed exactly where it was. If she didn't, I would tell my brother everything I'd seen and everything she'd admitted. I made it clear I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't negotiating. She laughed at first, a short, incredulous sound like she thought I was joking. Then she realized I wasn't. Her laughter died, replaced by anger, then fear. She tried to bargain, tried to minimize what she'd offered me minutes earlier, suggesting favors, connections, anything that wouldn't leave a paper trail. I shook my head. I told her she'd already said she'd give me whatever I wanted. This was what I wanted. It took longer than I expected, but eventually she agreed. Driving home that night, I kept waiting for guilt to hit me like a wave, for nausea or shame or some sudden clarity that would make me turn around and undo everything. Instead, I felt oddly calm, detached. I told myself that if this had been anyone else, any decent person, I would have gone straight to them without hesitation. But my brother had taught me a lesson a long time ago about consequences and who they applied to. He had taught me that truth was optional when it became inconvenient. I was just finally using his rules. The payments started the following month. Chloe never missed one. The money showed up in my account like clockwork, silent proof that she was more afraid of exposure than she was committed to her marriage. I didn't need it to survive. I had my own job, my own apartment, my own carefully built independence, but it changed something in me all the same. Every transfer felt like a small, bitter acknowledgement of the pain my family had dismissed for years. It wasn't justice, it wasn't closure, but it was something. 6 months passed like that. I kept my distance from everyone involved, speaking to Chloe only when absolutely necessary, refusing to engage beyond confirming payments. I almost started to believe the arrangement would last indefinitely, that secrets could be contained if everyone played their part. That illusion shattered the day I saw a man standing outside my apartment building, holding a cake and smiling at the security camera like he belonged there. Marcus. For a split second, I didn't recognize him. Not because his face had changed, but because my brain refused to accept that he was standing there on my street, holding a brightly frosted cake like some kind of joke. The security camera feed glowed on my phone screen as I stood frozen in my kitchen, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out everything else. He smiled up at the lens, shifting the box in his hands, leaning casually as if he'd done this 100 times before. I later realized that was the most unsettling part of it, how comfortable he looked, like my address was just another stop on a route he'd already mapped out. I didn't buzz him in. I didn't open the door. I stayed exactly where I was and watched him through the screen, every nerve in my body tightening as he spoke to the intercom. He told security it was a surprise that he was delivering a birthday cake. The lie slid out of his mouth, easily polished and believable. Somehow it worked. The guard didn't question it. People like Marcus rarely get questioned. I told them I wasn't expecting anyone and that they could leave the package outside. A moment later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "We should talk." I didn't reply. I cracked the door just enough to hear him when he finally stepped back from the camera, his voice carrying down the hallway. He didn't bother pretending anymore. He told me he knew about the arrangement. He told me Chloe had confessed everything, tearfully, fearfully, painting herself as trapped. He said I needed to back off, that I couldn't just blackmail someone and expect it to end well. The word made my stomach twist. Not because I believed it, but because I knew how easily it could be weaponized against me if he chose to push it far enough. When I told him to leave, his tone changed. The friendliness dropped, replaced by something colder, sharper. He reminded me that he could make my life very difficult if he wanted to. He didn't specify how. He didn't need to. The implication hung there heavy and deliberate. Before he left, he set the cake down in front of my door and walked away without another word. I waited several minutes before opening it. Inside, written in thick icing, was a single insult. No name, no explanation. Just a reminder that he'd been there and that he wasn't done. I was shaking by the time I closed the door again. Anger followed close behind the fear, hot and uncontrollable. I'd kept my end of the deal. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't slipped up. And still Chloe had decided to unleash him on me, to let him threaten me in my own home. That was the moment everything snapped into place. This was never going to stay contained. Silence wasn't protecting me anymore. It was painting a target on my back. I checked my phone to call her, only to realize she'd blocked me. That was it. I didn't hesitate after that. I called my brother and told him everything. I told him what I'd seen at the wedding, what Chloe had admitted, the money, the threats. I didn't soften it. I didn't dramatize it. I gave him the truth the way I wish someone had given it to me years ago. When I finished, I hung up before he could respond. I went for a walk, needing air, needing distance from the fallout I knew was already spreading. By the time I came back, my phone was lighting up nonstop. Missed calls, messages. Chloe accusing me of ruining her life. My mother calling repeatedly. The storm I'd tried to contain had finally broken and there was no going back now. I didn't answer any of the messages at first. I set my phone face down on the counter and stood there staring at it like it might explode if I touched it again. Part of me wanted to run, pack a bag, get in my car, disappear for a few days until the noise died down. Another part of me, the exhausted part that had been swallowing anger since I was 14, was tired of running. I'd told the truth. What happened next wasn't mine to manage. When I finally checked my phone, there were more than 50 messages from Chloe alone. They ranged wildly: rage, panic, bargaining. Blame all cycling so fast it was almost dizzying. She accused me of betrayal, of greed, of destroying her future. She told me I was cruel, vindictive, heartless. She said I'd ruined everything. What she never said was that she was sorry, not once, not for cheating, not for paying me to stay silent, not for sending Marcus to my door. My brother called me later that night. His voice sounded hollow, like something had been scooped out of him. He told me he'd confronted Chloe, that she'd tried to deny it at first, then cried when he showed her the messages he'd found on her phone. Apparently he'd suspected something for a while, late-night secrecy. The way she guarded her screen, but he'd convinced himself it was nothing. He said he couldn't believe I'd let it go on for 6 months. He said he felt humiliated, betrayed. I listened quietly, absorbing the irony of hearing him talk about betrayal as if it were a foreign concept. He told me he was filing for divorce. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. I felt numb. After we hung up, I sat on my couch in the dark, replaying the conversation in my head, waiting for some wave of regret or vindication to wash over me. Nothing came. Just a dull, familiar ache, the same one I'd felt years ago when no one had defended me. History didn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymed in ways that were impossible to ignore. My parents called the next morning. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask what Marcus had said to me or whether I'd been scared. They didn't ask why Chloe had felt comfortable threatening me through someone else. They asked why I'd enabled the affair. They told me what I'd done was disgusting, illegal, that I owed my brother an apology, and that I needed to return every cent of the money I'd taken because it was blackmail. I felt something snap then, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a thread finally breaking under too much strain. I told them no. I told them Chloe had offered me anything to keep her secret, and I'd named my price. I told them I hadn't forced her. I hadn't extorted her. I'd given her a choice, and she'd taken it. I told them the money wasn't theirs, and it wasn't my brother's either. It was between Chloe and me. I reminded them calmly that none of this would have happened if she hadn't cheated in the first place. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When my mother spoke again, her voice was cold. "We don't recognize you anymore," she said. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it caught me off guard. They hadn't recognized me when I was 14 and being bullied. They hadn't recognized me when I stopped going to school events, when my grades slipped, when I stopped talking at dinner. They hadn't recognized me when I quietly built a life for myself without their help. But now, suddenly, they were shocked by who I'd become. They told me that if I didn't apologize and make things right, they would cut me off. This time I didn't beg, I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I told them I wouldn't apologize for protecting myself in a family that never protected me. I told them I was done being the convenient villain in a story they refused to look at honestly. Then I hung up. I blocked them everywhere that same day. There was a strange peace in the silence that followed. No more calls, no more accusations. Just me, my apartment, and the echo of a decision I'd been circling for years. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for their disappointment. I wasn't waiting to be scolded into compliance. I was alone, and it felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The silence didn't last. It crept in softly at first, almost politely, like the eye of a storm pretending to be calm. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I slept without checking my phone every 10 minutes. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't orbiting around my family's moods or my brother's shadow. I told myself that cutting them off was enough, that distance alone could heal what proximity had poisoned. Then my cousin messaged me. She didn't say much at first, just asked if I was okay. Then she sent me a screenshot. It was a Facebook post from my father, long and emotional, written like a confession from a wounded man trying to hold his family together. He named me, not directly, but clearly enough that anyone who knew us would understand. He said I'd destroyed my brother's marriage over a petty high school grudge. He said I'd taken advantage of a vulnerable situation. He said he didn't recognize the daughter he'd raised. What he didn't say was anything about the rumor, about 4 years of bullying, about silence that nearly broke me, about Chloe offering me anything before I ever named a price, about Marcus showing up at my door with a threat disguised as frosting. He told a story that painted my brother as a devastated husband and himself as a heartbroken father, and me as the villain who finally went too far. I stared at the screen for a long time before I felt anything at all. Then I got angry. Not the hot, reckless anger that makes you say things you regret, but something colder and more deliberate, the kind that settles in your bones and waits. I realized then that no matter how quiet I stayed, they would never let me leave the story. They needed me in it. Someone had to absorb the blame so everyone else could remain comfortable. And if they were going to drag my name through the mud anyway, I wasn't going to keep protecting theirs. So I told my side. I wrote everything slowly, carefully, with receipts and dates and details I'd never spoken aloud. I wrote about the rumor, about the bullying, about my parents' refusal to intervene, about the wedding, the parking lot, the offer, the deal. I wrote about Marcus at my door, and the moment I realized silence had stopped being safe. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult. I didn't ask for sympathy. I just told the truth the way I wish someone had told it for me when I was 14. When I hit post, my hands were shaking. For 15 minutes, I didn't check the notifications. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall, bracing myself for the backlash I'd been trained to expect. But when I finally looked, something unexpected had happened. Messages were coming in, not from my parents' generation, not from people who barely knew me, but from former classmates, people who remembered the rumor, people who remembered how suddenly everyone had turned on me, people who said they were sorry they hadn't spoken up back then. And then hours later, the story shifted again. A woman I didn't know commented on my post. She said she'd gone to high school with my brother. She said she'd recently been back in town and that he'd reached out to her after seeing her on social media. He told her he was single. He used a different account, one without photos of his wife. They went on a date. They slept together. And then once she left the city, he blocked her everywhere. She hadn't known he was married. She hadn't known any of it until she saw my father's post and recognized his name. The realization hit her hard enough that she felt compelled to speak up. As her comment gained traction, others followed. Stories I'd never heard before surfaced, all painting the same picture: a man who never really changed, just learned how to hide it better. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My brother, who had been so publicly devastated by infidelity, had been committing it himself, quietly, strategically. Even now, even with everything falling apart. The narrative my parents had worked so hard to protect collapsed in real time, and for once, I wasn't the one being scrutinized. Chloe went quiet after that. I later heard through someone else that she was pregnant, that the timing was complicated, that paternity was uncertain, that divorce proceedings were turning ugly. My parents blamed me for that too, of course. According to them, everything that followed was my fault, every consequence, every fallout, every uncomfortable truth. But something in me had finally shifted. Their accusations no longer had weight. They were just noise from people who had already made up their minds. I blocked the rest of my extended family after that. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to suddenly felt entitled to judge me, to tell me they expected better. From what I still don't know. We'd exchange pleasantries at holidays and nothing more. Their disappointment meant nothing to me. Their silence before this meant everything. 3 days after I shared my story, I sat alone in my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt in years: relief. Not joy, not triumph, relief. The kind that comes when you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. I didn't feel responsible for my brother's choices. I didn't feel guilty for Chloe's lies. I didn't feel obligated to repair a family that had never repaired me. I'd spent so long waiting for karma, for validation, for someone to finally see what had been done to me. And when it came, it didn't feel explosive. It felt quiet, settled. I don't know what happens next for any of them. I don't need to. I've told security not to let them into my building. I've blocked their numbers. I've built walls that are firm and intentional. For once, I'm choosing peace over performance. My family wanted a scapegoat. They got the truth instead. And this time, I'm not apologizing for it.